How did you use media technologies in the construction and research, planning and evaluation stages?
We used a variety of media technologies in the film process. First, for the research and planning, we wanted to use technologies that differed from the typical paper questionnaires and PowerPoint presentations. Therefore, we used SurveyMonkey instead, which allowed us to collect our data in a more efficient way and make the results easier to interpret. We created charts of the results, which we then analysed to help us with ideas for the music video. We also used the presentation software Prezi to present our research in a more interactive and user-friendly way. Prezi allowed us as users to make our research seem more fun and more fairly simple to use. It also had the ability to add more photos and video clips to our presentation, which made everything that much more helpful. To present our research and planning, we not only had a blog but also created a Twitter account because we identified that as becoming a predominant source of communication, it enabled us to research a wider audience as we tweeted every time we faced or overcame a problem, as well as when we published something on the blog. We used the HD cameras provided to us by school to film the focus group as well as the main production. We filmed our focus group because it's time consuming to ask questions on paper, as individuals attempted not to answer properly and there was a risk of losing sheets of paper. We also used the Nikon camera for not only the post shoot but also for the Godzilla parts of the music video, as they are stop motion animation based. As we became familiar with the camera, it was easier to use and we stuck to the basic functions of it. To edit our product, we used Final Cut, which we can now use with ease since editing our AS coursework last year.
When editing the video, the thing that took the longest was adding the posturization effect. We used the posturizing effect on some parts to make it look like it was in a cartoon strip. This took the longest because we edited everything first and then later on added the posturization effect in the correct places. You can see it here, so we just clicked on the part of the clip we wanted and then we added the posturization effect, and we changed the levels of colour to make them all look sort of the same. So we used the same numbers, 3, 5, 4 for the red, green and blue, so they all had the same coloured posturization effect. Also to these parts, using LiveType, we added words to the bottom to make it look like a cartoon strip. We did it on LiveType so that it came onto the screen, it didn't just appear at the bottom, it actually played. Second of all, I'm going to talk about how we used green screen. Because green screen was the main part of our whole project, it is used in most scenes throughout. It was used in the band scene, it was used when we took a film of the buildings, it was used for the ninja parts. We just went into key, chroma key, and then just added it to the clip that we wanted. Then we could go into here and change these levels and change these levels so that the background disappeared. On most of the green screen we used, the background disappeared, but as you can see here, there is some green left. That was just from where there was shadows in the backdrop. Third thing I'm going to talk about is how we drew out on paper the flames from the Godzilla. We drew them out, then photographed them on the background of green screen so that we could fade out the background, and then we just enlarged it so it started off small and then got bigger, and then we posturized it at the end. That's the only drawing that we did and added to it. The last thing I'm going to talk about is how much layering we did. So a lot of editing took place. For example here, lots and lots and lots and lots of layers were used, so that we could add the effect of the fire appearing slowly growing. So it started off one and then got bigger and bigger. Yeah, that was probably the most difficult part of the project. And you can see here we layered all the ninjas and it was very difficult to organise.
GIMP was essential for the creation of our digipack, and as it has not been used before, we found it very challenging.
First of all, I'll start off by talking about how I made the front cover of the album, because this required the most work and is the main subject of the digipack. First of all, I did some experimentation of what effects I was going to use. So I chose this picture, and because our theme was Godzilla, I wanted to make the lead singer look like she had lizard sort of scaly skin. So the way I did this was I imported a skin layer of a lizard as a layer, and then I imported the picture of Emma as a layer, and I changed the opacity of the picture of Emma so that the lizard skin would show through. I had to use different modes so that the skin colour of Emma's skin was the same, but the pattern showed through, and also the shadows from the lizard skin showed through, but I didn't want her to have green skin at this point. What we were looking at in our experimentation phase, we were looking at changing the colour of the lips so that they stood out, and so I used eraser on just the lip area so that it erased the skin colour that Emma has, and it showed through the lizard green skin colour. I then used paint tint to colour the tongue, chose the colour, changed the opacity so that it was not 100%. If it was 100%, then you wouldn't be able to see these shadows of the tongue and it would look really obviously quite bad. So I changed the opacity so that the colour came through but the shadow also came through. And then with the eyes, I just tinted them exactly the same the way I did with the tongue, but chose red. I also had to use the path tool to cut out just this part of her so that I could change the background to whatever one I wanted to. This isn't actually what we used in the end for our front cover. This was just experimenting with what effects I could in the end use. I chose this photograph. First of all, I used the path tool again and I cut around all of this. I used the path tool rather than cropping it because it's much easier to get into all the cracks and therefore get a better image at the end. Once I'd cut it out, I applied the scaled effect, which I used on the other ones. I also did it to the hands this time. I did it to the face, the hands, and then if you can see the slits in her jeans, I also did it there. Basically how I did it was I first imported this picture of Emma. I then imported as a layer the lizard picture and I placed it underneath this layer. I then changed the opacity of the lizard layer and I then erased where I wanted the lizard layer to come through. So if I erased over here, then the lizard layer would show through, but I only erased where I wanted it, so only where I could see skin. The opacity was much lighter on the face than I used on the hands, so the hands and the legs stand out way more. I also did the neck here. I then again applied the colour to to make the tongue purple, to give it a more of a lizard effect. I didn't colour in the lips, I just applied two of the same photos as layers over the top of each other, so that when I erased where the lips were, it was more prominent because there was 2 layers of Emma's lips rather than 1 layer, so the red colour that she already had on her lips was stronger. I then tinted the eyes to give her red eyes, to give her more of a Godzilla look. I also changed the background to grey. This I thought worked quite well at first, but didn't really incorporate the idea of Tokyo City, which is another prominent feature in our movie. So in the end we changed the background to Tokyo City, which I think works better, although it does take away from the detail in her lizard features. Last of all, I chose the lettering. I applied the tool, then I chose the colour as green here, and then I applied this screen effect mode. It didn't have to be screen, it could have been overlay, could have been multiply, it could have been all of these, but I chose that the best effect was screen, so that the colour of the font changes with how dark the background is. So here it's quite dark, whereas over here the L's quite light. You can see here all the layers that were used. So that's just the hand where it was rubbed out. That's the other hand. This is where I was rubbing out using rubber to produce the scale in the background. So here you can see that if I click off, you can no longer see this lizard skin layer. Whereas if you click it back on, you can see where it's been rubbed out. Lastly, I cropped this picture and put it into the Digipack template that I found on the internet, and just cropped it so that it fit this shape. Now I'm going to talk about how I edited the inside photograph for the Digipack. First of all, I picked this picture, which was this. I then wanted to use the effect where the lips were the only prominent colour, which is what we researched as being something that was used on other Digipacks. To do this, I, as layers, imported the same photo twice. To the first layer, I turned it black and white using colours. I desaturated it, so it was just black and white. Then I posted the other one on the other picture on top, which was this one. Because the coloured layer is behind the black and white layer, I was able to use the rubber and rub out where the lips were, so that the lips that were in the first photo could be seen through the black and white photo. I then went into looking at not only changing the lips colour, but also changing the shoes. So here you can see that I've rubbed out this part of the shoe, this part of the shoe, this bit, and this bit of the shoe. In the end, we decided that we wouldn't go with that. We went with this original one. Second of all, we wanted to add in our own drawings. So we drew out a Godzilla, which can be seen here, and we scanned it in. We also drew out fire and scanned it in. We then applied it to the picture that we already had. We used the rubber to crop the bottom, to crop around all of this, crop around here, crop around all of this, so that you could see all the fire. Here we decided that we would experiment with changing the colours of the drawn part of it to make this green and this red. The problem was, because we could only use one colour for each and we couldn't colour it in, meant that it was very simple colours, and the effect it gave we didn't like. So we decided just to keep it with black and white. This image wasn't very clear, and so we added an effect. So we went into colours, we went into curves, and we changed the curves so that some of it was dark and some of it was lightened, which you can see. The foreground fire is very dark, the Godzilla in the background isn't so dark, but the main feature, which is this picture, is quite bright. We then lastly cropped it and put it into the final Digipack. For the back cover, which looked finally like this, we first of all chose a Tokyo setting background to link the front cover and the back cover, so they both had the same theme of background. We then used colours to desaturate it so that it was in black and white, which gave it a nighttime feel. We then cropped pictures, photographs that we'd taken on our photo shoot, and cropped them in a separate file, and then imported them into this final file as layers. So here you can see that they've all singly been imported as layers. We could then shrink them so that they were smaller and larger. So this one was larger because it was closer to in the foreground, and this one's smaller because it was in the background. And we tried to place them on top of buildings so that it looked more real. We then imported a barcode and placed it in here, imported it as a layer and placed it in here and sized it up. We then used the same tool for text and drew out all the text, typed it all out, used the same green that we used on the front cover so that it was linked again, and we also typed out all of this. We did this so that it was more similar. The colour we used for the font is very contrasting to the colour we decided to use for the background. It makes the song name stand out. Finally we cropped this and added it to the final Digipack template. Lastly, we did the background for where the CD sits in the Digipack. We did this by again drawing out a picture of Godzilla and scanning it in, and then using curves tool, we changed how the pencil looked on the paper, making it stand out more. We then again used the same theme of the same green colour, which is seen on the front cover and the back cover in the writings, and we've used the green because it's a colour associated with Godzilla. We went for something quite simple for this design of the background of the CD. This is because if we wanted to put the same design on the actual CD, it would need to be a simple design. And then last of all, we cropped this and put it into the final Digipack template. When making the poster, we first of all chose which picture we were going to use. We then did some experimentation with the colours we could use. So here we just went into colours, went into curves, and played around with the different colours that could be produced just by changing the colour curves. We did several experiments of these, which can be seen here. This one's more blurry than the others. This one's brighter again. This one uses more greens and purples, which are more related to the Godzilla theme that we wanted to go with. In the end, we decided that because this doesn't really link with the Digipack that we did or the film, where we didn't really use these colours, that we would just experiment with just going with black and white again. So here in the final product, you can see that we just went with black and white. We didn't just go into colours and desaturate, we desaturated, and then once it was black and white, went into curves and changed it so that around the eyes where we'd put makeup on, it was a lot darker, and where there was shadows in the hair, it was a lot darker, and so that meant where it was light, like in her cheeks and down here, that there was more contrast, which produced a nicer effect. We then cropped the picture, cropping out a little bit of their head, because that's the look that we wanted, and made it black. This also allowed us to create the right shape that a poster would have. Finally, we added the writing. We wanted to go with quite a simple look because this is when we were looking at other people's posters, this was something that they had not a lot of writing that gave the main information. So we, again going with the theme of green, which was used throughout the Digipack and is because Godzilla's green, we went with the same colour green for the text here, and we went with a quite gothic font, which was also a font that we used in the Digipack. So again, linking both of them. It's bright and so contrasts with the black and white background.
We used LiveType to create the text for our animation sequences. We started off by choosing a background, and then in the end we decided on Inkback. But as we just wanted the background to be white, we applied this and then double clicked on this, and then you go to attributes and then you can select the colour which you which you want. So we just went for an all white background and then black text on top of the white background. Okay, so you just type in the text that you want. And then it comes up here. You can then choose the font which you want. We went through all the fonts and we compared them to other comic strips and decided on this font. We then added an effect called pop-up, in which the text comes down individually, with each letter individually. This then produced the overall effect,